Dyatlov Pass incident. 9 hikers died running from their tent in terror. February 1959. 9 experienced hikers set up camp on a remote mountain slope in Russia's Ural Mountains. Something happened that night, something so terrifying that they tore through their tent from the inside and fled barefoot into negative 30-degree weather. When search teams found them weeks later, the scene was beyond disturbing. Broken bones, missing eyes, radiation on their clothes, and not a single logical explanation for what made them run. In January 1959, 10 friends, all experienced hikers and skiers, set out on a challenging winter expedition in the northern Ural Mountains of Soviet Russia. They were led by Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student known for his expertise in outdoor survival. The group consisted mostly of students and recent graduates from the Ural Polytechnic Institute. They were fit, experienced, and well-prepared. This wasn't their first dangerous trek. They'd trained for months for this expedition. Their plan was ambitious: to reach Otor-10, a mountain about 10 kilometers north of where they'd set up their base camp. The route was classified as Category 3, the most difficult designation in Soviet mountaineering, but this group was confident they could handle it. One member, Yuri Yudin, had to turn back early due to illness. He was the only one who survived. Later, he would say that decision saved his life. The remaining 9 continued into the wilderness: Igor Dyatlov, Zinaida Kolmogorova, Lyudmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolovatov, Rustem Slobodin, Yuri Doroshenko, Yuri Krivonashenko, Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, and Alexander Zolotaryov. On February 1st, they reached the eastern slope of a mountain called Kholat Syakhl. The name, in the language of the indigenous Mansi people, means dead mountain. They set up their tent on the slope, an unusual decision. Experienced hikers would normally camp in a more sheltered area, particularly in the brutal winter conditions. But for reasons we'll never know, they stayed on that exposed mountainside. That night, something went horribly wrong. When the group didn't return as scheduled, a search party was sent out on February 26. What they found would become one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of the 20th century. The search team spotted the tent first. It was partially collapsed, covered in snow, but still standing. As they approached, they realized something was terribly wrong. The tent had been cut open from the inside, long, deliberate slashes through the canvas. Whoever made those cuts was trying to get out fast, and they didn't bother with the door. Inside the tent, everything was still there: food, warm clothing, boots. The hikers' personal belongings were neatly arranged as if they'd been settling in for the night. But the hikers themselves, gone. Outside in the snow, investigators found footprints. Some were barefoot, others were in socks or a single boot. The prints led downhill away from the tent toward the tree line about 1.5 kilometers away. Following those footprints, searchers made their first grim discovery. Under a large cedar tree, they found the bodies of Yuri Krivonashenko and Yuri Doroshenko. Both were barefoot, dressed only in underwear. They'd tried to start a fire. Broken branches and burnt bark surrounded them. They died from hypothermia. But here's what was strange. The cedar tree had branches broken off up to 5 meters high, as if someone had climbed up desperately, trying to see something or get away from something. Between the cedar tree and the tent, searchers found 3 more bodies over the next few days: Igor Dyatlov, Zinaida Kolmogorova, and Rustem Slobodin. All 3 were positioned as if they'd been trying to crawl back to the tent. They died from hypothermia as well. But Rustem had a small skull fracture. Not fatal, but puzzling. 5 bodies found. 4 still missing. It took 2 more months to find the remaining 4 hikers: Lyudmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolovatov, Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, and Alexander Zolotaryov. They were found in a ravine about 75 meters from the cedar tree, buried under 4 meters of snow. And this is where the case goes from mysterious to absolutely terrifying. These 4 had not died from hypothermia. They had catastrophic injuries. Lyudmila Dubinina had massive chest trauma. Her ribs were fractured so severely that it was compared to the force of a car crash. Her tongue, eyes, and part of her lips were missing. Nikolai Thibault-Brignol had a major skull fracture that would have been fatal. Alexander Zolotaryov also had severe chest fractures, multiple ribs broken. The medical examiner stated that the force required to cause these injuries was extremely high and could not have been inflicted by another human. The damage was internal, no external wounds, no bruising. And here's the detail that turned this from a tragedy into a phenomenon. Some of their clothing was found to contain trace amounts of radioactive contamination. Soviet authorities launched an investigation, but it was strange. The case was classified. Files were sealed. The official conclusion? An unknown compelling force caused the deaths. That's it. No further explanation. The case was closed, and the area was sealed off to hikers for 3 years. So what happened on Dead Mountain that night? Theory 1, avalanche. For decades, the most popular theory was an avalanche. The hikers heard or felt snow shifting, panicked, cut through the tent, and ran downhill. In the chaos and extreme cold, they became separated and died from hypothermia and injuries sustained during the avalanche. In 2019, scientists conducted new studies and concluded that a rare type of delayed avalanche could explain the severe internal injuries without external damage. But this theory has problems. Experienced hikers would know not to camp in an avalanche-prone area. The tent was still partially standing, not buried, and the cuts were made from inside, suggesting they were fleeing something, not escaping being buried. Theory 2, military testing. Remember the radioactive clothing? Some researchers believe the hikers stumbled into a Soviet military testing zone. Perhaps they witnessed something classified, a missile test, a weapons experiment, radioactive testing. The military tracked them down. The injuries were inflicted by shock waves or a parachute mine. The case was sealed to protect state secrets. This explains the radiation, the unknown compelling force conclusion, in the area being closed for years. But it doesn't explain why the hikers fled their tent in terror before any attack, or why the military would need to cover it up so dramatically. Theory 3, infrasound. This is where things get scientific and eerie. Strong winds moving through the mountain's unique shape could have created infrasound, low-frequency sound waves that humans can't hear but can feel. Infrasound has been shown to cause feelings of extreme anxiety, paranoia, dread, and even hallucinations. Imagine experiencing sudden, overwhelming terror with no identifiable source. You'd run too. This explains why they fled in panic, cutting through the tent instead of using the entrance. Once outside in the freezing cold, they couldn't return. Hypothermia set in. Some tried to find shelter in the ravine, where they were later buried by snow. But what about the internal injuries? Could a fall into the ravine explain them? Maybe, but the force described by medical examiners seems too extreme. Theory 4, something we can't explain. The indigenous Mansi people had avoided Kolatsyakal for generations, calling it a cursed place. Locals reported strange lights in the sky around the time of the incident. Other hikers in the area that night reported seeing orange spheres floating in the sky. Some believe the group encountered something unexplainable, whether that's ball lightning, military craft, atmospheric phenomena, or something else entirely. The missing eyes and tongue, decomposition and scavenging animals, the radioactive clothing. Some of the hikers worked in facilities that handled radioactive materials, but the overwhelming terror that made 9 experienced hikers run barefoot into deadly cold, that remains unexplained. The truth is, every theory has gaps. Every explanation leaves questions unanswered. In 2019, Russian authorities reopened the case, 60 years after the incident. They officially concluded it was an avalanche. But many people, including surviving family members and researchers who've spent decades studying the case, don't buy it. Yuri Yudin, the only survivor who turned back before reaching Dead Mountain, spent the rest of his life trying to understand what happened to his friends. He visited the site multiple times. He gave interviews. He reviewed theories. He died in 2013, still without answers. Before he died, he said something haunting. If I had a chance to ask God just one question, it would be, what really happened to my friends that night? 9 experienced hikers set up camp on a mountain slope. Something made them so terrified that they tore through their tent and ran barefoot into fatal cold. Some died trying to return. Others died from injuries that defy easy explanation. Was it an avalanche? A military cover-up? A natural phenomenon we barely understand? Or something we'll never be able to explain? The Dyatlov Pass incident has haunted investigators, scientists, and mystery enthusiasts for over 65 years. And despite modern forensics, computer simulations, and renewed investigations, we're still asking the same question. What were they running from? The mountain knows, but the mountain isn't telling. If this case gave you chills like it did me, subscribe to Unsolved Vault. We're covering the mysteries that refuse to be solved. Drop a comment with your theory: avalanche, military, infrasound, or something else. Stay curious, stay safe, and maybe avoid mountains called Dead Mountain. Thanks for watching.